Do you want your team to look like this on Football Manager? Because this video will teach you how. Obviously, you probably already knew that. That's why you're here. Hi, I'm Zealand. Nice to meet you. You come here often? This is something I've never made a video about before, building super teams. I make a lot of videos like the Save Your Save series that help people catch up to the best teams in the world. This video is how to pass them. And there are two situations you could find yourself in here. One, you've meticulously built up a team over a decade or two in the game, and you have eventually caught up to the Manchester Cities, the Ajaxes, the Real Madrids, or the Barcelonas of the world. The other situation is you are just stepping right into one of the larger clubs on the planet. Maybe you're starting your save with a Manchester United, maybe you're doing a journeyman and you just got hired by Manchester United, in which case, I'm so sorry to hear that. I bring up those two different scenarios because there is one key difference. The age profile and wage structure of the team that you just took over is inherently going to be different than the team that you've built for the last 10 to 15 years. Ideally, on this side, you've got a much younger team with lower wages because you are just ascending to the same level. If you're on this side, you probably have a bunch of overpaid older players. And if you are in this situation or you feel like you are stuck on this side, the key is to eliminate waste. And you can eliminate this waste by identifying areas of waste. And that is our first topic of discussion today, class. You see, in my save on Twitch, which if you want to watch, then you can obviously follow the Twitch link in the description. I figure you know how the internet works by now. But I joined Tottenham Hotspur. They were in 11th and I took over in December. Not a super pleasant spot. Although I did take over for Zinedine Zidane after he got fired at Tottenham, and he did leave the office in a very clean state. And when you jump into the deep end like this, you run into players like, I don't know, Santi Jimenez. My situation with Tottenham, the Premier League in particular, is flush with cash, and this is a problem you will run into if you are taking over or creating a huge club. The amount of money that players will demand from 5-star reputation clubs is utterly obscene. And once you start paying players that obscene amount of money, you can't move them. We see this happen to a ton of big clubs in real life where they get stuck with players on huge wages that they can't get to leave because nobody else is going to pay them that. That means that when you are taking over or becoming a big club, there will just inherently be players that are on a much bigger wage for a long period of time than they actually deserve based off their ability. And if you're trying to figure out the difference between just another good player and the types of players that you're going to need to acquire, observe. This is Bellarmino Secca. He is one of the best players in my Football Manager save on Twitch. He is unbelievable. I think anybody that's played Football Manager for a decent amount of time would be able to recognize that. He is getting paid $16.9 million per year until 2035. That's a lot of money. It's about $340,000 a week. But when I took over the club, this guy, Pape Matar Sarr, was making the same amount of money as Secca is making right now. And if you look at the attributes, that's not the type of guy that should be getting paid $340,000 a week. So I pretty quickly was able to diagnose that Pape Matar Sarr was amongst a group of players on this Tottenham team that was a waste of resources. I don't care how big your wage budget is, if you're paying somebody $17 million a year, they better be better than that. But he was far from the only candidate on my team. I had veteran Rodrigo Bentancur, who was on a massive deal. We managed to find a $35 million transfer in January to move him and free up some wage budget. James Maddison was soaking up a massive wage, so even though we only got a $7 million transfer for him because he was so old, it was just a relief that Celta Vigo was willing to pay him enough to get him off our team. And then Quentin Timber. He actually wasn't being paid that much in wage, but we got a nearly $50 million offer for him. I didn't think he was particularly good or made our team much better, but we could use the money to go out and try and make a move in January. If you want to build a super team, Quentin Timber is not part of it. And there were plenty more examples of waste on our team, but we're going to get to them later because once you start unloading these guys, you need something to do with the money that you're freeing up. If you're getting rid of waste, you need to find somebody to effectively spend money on, like this guy. This brings us to step 2 of building a super team, which is to cast a very wide net. At the point where this video actually applies to you, you should have tons of scouts, and you want to use them all. But unlike what I prefer to do when I'm building a team, if you're trying to build a super team with a club that already has all the resources in the world, you want to just start looking for good players right now. With my 31 scouts, actually, it's only 30. One of them left for Manchester City. I don't want to talk about it. With whatever scouts I have left, we're gonna create a high priority focus for basically every position group. There are a couple of different ways to approach this. I'm certainly not somebody that has gone through extensive testing on scouting. This is more of a feel thing for me in the recruitment focuses era. But I have noticed if you don't refine the scouting of your particular scouts, then your entire scouting department just gains an absolutely insane amount of knowledge over time. So if you're playing the long-term game here, narrowing down your scouting department just doesn't actually make too much sense to me. Because if you give Matthias Schwessig a few more years, this guy's gonna have extensive knowledge of the whole planet. But basically, I create a focus looking for players that are at least 2 stars with at least 3-star potential ability, which means it will identify wonder kids that have at least 2-star current ability. But if it's not a wonder kid, then the player needs to be at least 3-star current ability, right? If it's somebody that's 25, 26, 27 years old, they need to be at least 3-star current ability so that their potential ability is also that, so that they show up on this report. It's a way for me to look for pretty talented wonder kids and also good first team older players at the same time. You open this up to any position and then just click on the position group you want. You can see I've got fullbacks, center backs, defensive midfielder, center mid. Got another one looking specifically for ball winning midfielder types. I've got one looking for particularly fast players, goal dudes as strikers, and then I just have a pure wonder kid scouting report that helps me find guys that might develop in the future. Also, because I like not being annoyed by the same people popping up every single time, because these are all ongoing, I untick this. Don't include results found in other focuses. And if you ever feel like you want to see all of the targets there again, just click it and then restart the scouting thing and they'll find all the people they've already found. But if you're wondering what to do with all these players that you're casting a wide net for, you need to create shortlists. You need to know and love shortlists. You create one that I call target acquired. This is for players that, based off of their ability and their price point, you want them on your team right now, and in the next transfer window, you could see yourself making a deal for them. You also want another shortlist filled with players that are tremendously good, like these guys, but it's not feasible that you can sign them. Either they're not interested or their price point is too high. And then you want a third shortlist filled with players that are good enough to play for you, that their price point isn't offensive, so they're accessible, and you can sign somebody off this shortlist if, say, you sell a Quentin Timber, for example. I immediately have a shortlist full of players where I can go and search for that position and then plug somebody into my team. And because your scouting department is massive and incredibly well trained, you definitely want this to be ticked on all of those shortlists. Keep your scouting reports up to date. This will make sure that all of the scouting reports are very, very new, with the exception of these 6 people, because that scout just left my department and he was the person that had knowledge of these 6 players. But the oldest report in the entire shortlist is 95 days. So this is very up-to-date attribute and contract information. And that contract information is an important part, because if a player gets upset or there's a new release clause or whatever, then that player could be a lot more accessible and you wouldn't know about it until you refresh the report. But don't just leave it to your scouts though. You're gonna find the vast majority of the great superpowered wonder kids through 2 other methods. One, when the Wonder Kid Next Gen 50 pops up, you need to scout everybody you don't know on that list immediately. They are handing you a list of the 50 best wonder kids according to media, reputation, whatever. You need to look at all of them. I also recommend scouting every youth national team tournament. If you have 31 scouts like I do and my scouting team is full, then you can turn through an entire youth national tournament in like 3 months. Also, senior tournaments, definitely be looking for any players that you don't already know about, particularly the young ones. Because what we're looking for to build a super team are the best young players in the world, not the ones with the best potential, the best ones right now. And that's a key difference, because a huge part of this is don't fall for potential. Don't do it. I made a whole video, thumbnail looks like this, about how the stars will lie to you. You need to trust what you see in the attributes right now. If you keep selling your best players and signing project players, you are never going to actually have a super team. It's not going to happen. You should think of your team as a conveyor belt. You have one superstar in a position now. You have one growing superstar. I'm not talking about somebody that's a 1.5 star, 5 star. I'm talking about somebody that's a 2.5 star, 5 star, who has great attributes that you love, that's growing into that superstar position. And then you have a few guys that they fill multiple roles, a couple of versatile role players. That should be your whole team composition. one starter, one backup, and a couple of switch hitters, behind somebody that plays both fullback positions, an extra center back here or there. And those switch hitters can be veterans, but those other two guys in those slots on your conveyor belt, they need to be very well thought out. They need to be under long contracts, and they need to be good. They need to be good now. You free up those resources by selling somebody here and selling somebody there. Well, now those resources are freed up. You cannot waste them. And the way you could waste them is by spending all of those resources on players that are not sure things. I mean, look, if they're really cheap and you're not wasting any resources, like registration-wise, like that stupid rule in England where you can only sign 6 U21 foreign players per season, then sure, go ahead and sign them, loan them out a couple of times and see if you can sell them at some point, or maybe they actually develop into a good player. But other than that, you do not want any of those 19-year-old 1.5-star, 5-star players. Leave that to the other people. Examples on my team of this in practice. One of my key signings is a guy named Jeniz Rejovic. This is a map showing Rejovic's entire improvement since he got on the team when I signed him for $50 million at 19 years old. You can see he has improved. We focused on getting his first touch up because he's a playmaker who had 13 first touch. What is that? But if you take all of these attribute improvements away, he was still an absolutely nasty player that could get into my team for just $50 million at 19 years old. Another great example, Kazuma Kanda. Available for under $8 million from the Japanese league. This kid came in at 18 years old, and even though he broke his leg right after he got here, he still managed to improve a decent bit. But even without these improvements, he had the athleticism, the work rate, the vision, the holy trinity to make an immediate impact as a very high-level winger. Other great examples are Belchior Canelio. This was just $39 million. Or Richard Vieg, who I just signed for a release clause of $7 million. Sorry, 6.25. Didn't mean to flex on you that hard. But the point is, these guys are out there, and while I'm expecting them to improve, I'm not counting on them improving 3 or 4 at every attribute in order to actually be a first-team player for me. They can step on the field for me right now. Yes, you want the superstar ahead of them, but by the time those superstars need to move on to the great transfer window in the sky, these guys will be ready. They've developed that bit more, and they've gained a ton of experience playing at this level. And I mentioned the transfer window in the sky. That's because if you are building a super team, almost everybody should be for sale, particularly at the beginning where you realize that you are kind of plateauing alongside all of the other good teams. Quite literally, anyone who is not this guy is sellable for the right price. Look, if I got $250 million, I'd sell him too. And there were 2 examples of those players at Tottenham. The first being Dejan Kulusevski. He's a really good player, a Tottenham legend who ended up playing 279 matches in the Premier League for Tottenham. But when Newcastle showed up with $100 million for a guy that was 30 years old and not a super elite player, I sold him because he was making $20 million a year and he was 30 years old. And again, not a super elite player. Seka is better than this guy, and it's not particularly close. There was also Mikey Moore, homegrown Tottenham winger who's got plenty of ability and definitely helped out with Champions League and Premier League registration. But I was aware that this guy is not a bona fide world-class winger. And when AC Milan showed up with, for some reason, $120 million for him, I said yes faster than any, it was like that SpongeBob skit where, you want to watch me do it again? I've already said yes 7 times. But those are the easy ones. When teams come to you and you realize you're going to have to replace a player and you go to the short list. The other good value plays are when you have players you realize are a waste of resources, but you can't get a good offer for them right away. Either the player doesn't want to leave or the market just isn't there for them at that time. In that situation, you have to be patient. Not only can getting into too much of a fight with these types of players absolutely torpedo your dynamics, you also will be able to find a decent offer for them at some point. So just getting mad and mutually terminating their contract or selling them for way below their value is just bad business. And I had a couple of legendary fights in this save with a couple of players in this group. Lee Kong-in was making a pile of money, more than Seka's making now. I was desperate to sell him in January, but I waited until the summer and we got $52 million for him from Aston Villa. And I felt like that was okay for a 29-year-old winger that isn't great. Same situation with Jonathan David. I'll be honest, his attributes are way better than they are now. He's gotten a lot worse at Aston Villa, but we waited until the summer and we got $40 million for him. But the real brutal fights were Sar and Santi Jimenez. Now, Santi Jimenez had just signed for the club the summer before I got there. So terrible situation. He had just come in for 70-something million and he was on 17.5 million per year. That's like 350,000 a week. And he's like, okay, he's not very good. So I had to wait this out. I used him as my backup striker because that was the best use of my resources. And he actually played pretty well for me. It was a bit deceiving. But in the following summer, I started to offer him out for loans instead of transfer transfers with a future fee on matches played. And we ended up being able to get 30 million when the best offer we'd gotten for him was 14 million up to that point, which was just too big of a loss to bear. But after 5 games, they agreed to pay us 30 million for Santi Jimenez, and we got his huge wage off the books and just took the L in terms of how much Zinedine Zidane decided to pay for that guy. The other one was Pape Matar Sarr. I spent 2 consecutive transfer windows absolutely desperate to unload this guy because even when I was trying to utilize my resources, he barely played at all, and he just had a massive wage. The issue was that he did not want to leave. And that brings up a very, very difficult spot. Because while I normally advise never antagonizing a player, locker room atmosphere is the holy grail. It is the reason you win and the reason you lose. It's almost like the rest of the game barely even matters as long as you have a great atmosphere or a terrible one. And so, Pape Matar Sarr, we needed to anger him, though. I broke my rule. But with Pape Matar Sarr, there was the rare example of a situation where you really do need to anger the player. You can do this in a couple of separate ways. You need to lower their expected playing time to surplus to requirements. You can also send them down to the youth team, and you're going to want to engage with intermediaries and their agent throughout the process. Keep hammering both of them to see if you can get the best offer out there. And definitely mess around with offering out for loan instead of transfer. But eventually, in the 3rd transfer window, the following January, we got an offer of 25 million from Liverpool. And it was an offer that he was willing to accept, and that was maybe the happiest day of my life. It happened! This is the moment! It was particularly surprising because the next thing I'm going to tell you, always sell in the summer. Going to war with a player in January is not a good idea. There are not a lot of buying clubs in January. That's the time for you to use some resources to plug a gap in your team to try and win some trophies at the end of the season. Because the Saudi clubs aren't buying in January and everybody else is more tentative. You want the Saudi clubs to be around and you want everybody else to be frisky for transfers, and that is all in the summer. So if you are going to go to war with a player, do it in the summer. My war with Sarr just carried over from the summer into January. Ideally, that won't happen to you. But this transfer strategy made us a truly ridiculous amount of money. We got good offers for players I knew wouldn't take us where we were going to go, from Franco Mastantuono to Samuele Ricci, right? We're getting 27, 33 million for those guys. We end up making $667 million in transfers out. And you bet your bottom dollar I spent all of that. Because I'm not trying to get to wonder kids before the big clubs get to them. I am the big club. So when I see somebody that looks like this, Jarell Hato, a physical freak with no holes mentally or technically, I spend 116 million to bring this guy in at the age of 24 because he'll be my left center back for the next decade. When I see a player like Mujahid Kaya who can play all across the front 4 positions, that has unbelievable ball control, good size, strength, athleticism, creativity, intelligence, I trigger his $89 million release clause. Because there are not a lot of players on the planet like Jarell Hato, and there are not a lot of players on the planet like Mujahid Kaya. My intense scouting also allows me to find players like Marcelo Enrique for just 20 million, who we then sold 2 years later to Lens for 93 million, after he played 43 first-team matches for me and was generally a reliable option. It's just to show you that not all of these guys have to be expensive. Ideally, they wouldn't be, but there are only so many superstars out there, and that's who you're trying to buy. I realize for some people, particularly, spending this amount of money can be nauseating, but think about it in percentages. If you have $150 million in your transfer budget, and Mujahid Kaya comes up for $89 million, you're spending about 60-something% of your transfer budget. You're not spending $89 million, you're spending 60-something% of your transfer budget on an insanely good player. I mean, heck, I saw somebody with these attributes who can play all the way from box-to-box midfielder to world-class striker. He had a $131 million release clause. I'm raking in money from these sales of Mikey Moore and Dejan Kulusevski. Who better to spend it on than this guy? Nobody else in the world has this guy. I mean, I know that's a fact because, like, we're all our own person. I'm just saying that this guy is one of one. And the truth is, there just aren't a ton of those guys out there, and you're not the club anymore that can develop all of them. There is a line to this, though. Unless you have one of those ridiculous transfer budgets of like 500 million with $1 billion in your club balance, nobody's worth over 150 million, right? You can find these players under 150 million because some of the best players in the world, if the club really wants them to stay and they're under long contracts, they can charge you upwards of 200 million for those players, and that is where where things start to get hairy, because it is just one player and they can get hurt. But that's just a personal line, and again, if a percentage of your transfer budget is able to pay off $250 million for the world's best player, shoot, do it. Now, there is something I said earlier that I want to clarify. The types of players that we sell, whether it be Dejan Kulusevski or Mikey Moore. The reason you cultivate those short lists is so that you can go in there and plan your moves 2-3 steps ahead and immediately have a replacement for it. When I sold Mikey Moore, I already had Paul McIntosh in a short list, and we got $120 million for Mikey Moore. I bought Paul McIntosh, who is younger and better, for $81 million. I made $39 million and brought in a dude who gets call-ups to the English national team, although they've still never given him a cap. That's sad. Or I sold Santi Jimenez and then brought in this guy, Kieran Tall. He was on a release clause for $74 million to teams in continental competitions. He was at Bournemouth. I've known about him for a long time, and $74 million's more than the $30 million we got for Santi Jimenez, but we'd done all these other great deals on loading players that we got good offers for, like Quentin Timber, and we were able to swing and bring in a guy who led us in goals last year when we won the Prem. I mean, sure, he's not Seka or Pavlak level, but he is an incredibly talented advanced forward. Good size, incredible off the ball, and obviously a sharpshooter. I mean, he's England's #1 striker, for crying out loud. He's got 12 goals in 21 matches. But before those guys left, I knew exactly who I was going to bring in to replace them. And eventually you would become a chess master, thinking 2-3 transfers ahead. You find a 17-year-old and you think, gee, my winger won't be ready to leave now, but in 2 years he can leave and I'll bring that guy in. You know, you'll see the vision. You'll see the timeline. Like Doctor Strange over here trying to save the universe. Portal! But there's one more thing. In order to actually build a super team, and it's very important, if you don't do this, you will torpedo everything you have accomplished by applying everything else we just talked about, okay? You have to maintain harmony, and it is hard to do, because huge wages make it hard to move players. Even when Saudi Arabia exists, took me a year and a half to sell Pape Matar Sarr, right? If you get in a position where somebody doesn't want to leave and you don't want them, their massive wage makes it very difficult for them to leave. And as a result, over-promising playing time is not something that you can fix in the transfer market. If you tell somebody they're going to be a regular starter, you damn well need to have those minutes lying around somewhere, because nothing can ruin an atmosphere faster than over-promising playing time to a bunch of superstars and then having them all get mad because you're over-rotated. And this can create incredibly frustrating situations where players that you want to sign meet every criteria we've talked about. They're young, they project to improve in the future, they have great ability, they fit your side, and their asking price is very reasonable for their talent level, but their demands are too much. Either they want too much playing time or they want too much salary. I am currently going through the emotional challenge of saying no to this guy. Calvin is incredibly athletic, good holy trinity, basically either-footed, can play across the front three, and is a terrific crosser. And if you're thinking, yeah, this guy's not bona fide superstar, his release clause is only $22 million. So this guy's, I mean, if he's on my team, he's worth $80 million instantly. The problem is the contract. As you can see down here, he's demanding over $12 million per season, which is $250,000 a week for a guy that's never played outside of Brazil. He is also demanding at least squad player playing time, which is not something I can give him right now. I already have McIntosh and Vig, and this guy, my starting left wing, George Shakichi. We Googled how to say it. So even though Calvin is an obvious great deal who's gonna get better and be worth a lot of money, it still doesn't make sense because it would ruin our squad harmony. But it's an okay problem to have. It means you already have better players. You just can't be the person to sign every good deal anymore. When you're building a super team, there's just no room for you to stash every great deal out there. And if it ever hurts, just remember, it's for the sake of the squad. And if you follow all of those rules, in 2 years, you'll be able to take an 11th place Tottenham and win the league. Granted, it was a lot harder because it was Tottenham, but we still got the job done. All you need is a healthy wage structure, healthy short lists, and you will have a healthy FM save. If you want to learn more about how misleading the stars can be, here is that video for you to check out. If you enjoyed this one, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys on stream. Goodbye now. Bye-bye now. Goodbye. See you later. Bye-bye now. Goodbye. Just go there already. I mean, my arm's getting tired. It's a lot.